The year was 1958, and the music world was about to change forever. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was at the height of his career. But little did anyone know, his last studio session before joining the army would be a roller coaster of triumph and frustration. Elvis walked into the studio on February 1st, 1958, with a sense of urgency. He knew that every song he recorded could be his last for a while. The pressure was immense, and it showed in the way he approached each track. The session began with a song called My Wish Came True, a tune he had tried to perfect back in September 1957, but this time it just didn't feel right. After a few takes, he and the band abandoned it, deciding to stick with the earlier version. Next up was Don't Ya Think It's Time. The song, written by Clyde Otis and Brooke Benton, should have been a slam dunk. Elvis had nailed mid-tempo rockers before, but this one was a struggle. It took 48 takes to get something decent, and even then, the final version was a splice of 3 different takes. The rhythm of the lyrics was awkward, and the recording lacked the natural flow that made Elvis's other hits so memorable. Your Cheatin' Heart was up next. A country standard written by the legendary Hank Williams, it should have been a perfect fit for Elvis, but something was off. The tempo was too slow, and the song never really took off. Elvis tried his best to inject some life into it, especially during the bridge, but it just didn't work. It was as if the song was weighing him down, reminding him of the challenges ahead. The session ended with Wear My Ring Around Your Neck. At 23, Elvis felt a bit out of place with the juvenile lyrics about a girl wearing his ring to show the world she was his. But he gave it his all, trying to salvage something from the session. The result was a frenetic, energetic track that somehow managed to become a hit, despite its silly lyrics. Ernst Jorgensen, a music historian, later described the session as disheartening. Steve Scholes, Elvis's producer at RCA, was close to panic. The king was about to be drafted into the army, and they needed hits to keep his career alive. This session was the last chance to get some usable material, and it didn't go as planned. It marked the end of an era, the last full session with Elvis and his original band, and his final recording with Bill Black, save for a quick return to the studio 10 days later to wrap up some unfinished business for the new movie. As Elvis prepared to join the army in March 1958, the world watched with a mix of curiosity and concern. The young man who had nothing and now had everything was about to face a new challenge. But even his harshest critics couldn't deny that Elvis had always conducted himself with dignity. The same columnist who once dismissed his music now praised his behavior, noting that despite his fame, Elvis had set a good example for his fans. In his new role as a soldier, he had the chance to prove himself once again. But the music world didn't stop, and the army wasn't the only thing on Elvis's mind. On June 10, 1958, another session was held to gather more material for his absence. The first song, I Need Your Love Tonight, was a complete departure from the previous session. It was silly, but Elvis was on fire. He took the lyrics in stride and turned the song into gold. The raw energy and sound were more important than the meaning, a return to his early days at Sun Records. A Big Hunk O' Love was even better. The harsh sound, Elvis's higher register, and storming solos by Floyd, Kramer, and Hank Garland created a track that felt like a Jerry Lee Lewis performance. Elvis loved the song, and it would become one of his go-to hits in the 1970s. Ain't That Loving You Baby went unreleased for 6 years, but it was a solid blues-based rocker. Elvis and the band found their groove, and the song was a far better record than Wear My Ring Around Your Neck. They continued to experiment with different arrangements, showing that even in the face of uncertainty, Elvis was still fully engaged. A Fool Such As I was a country standard that Elvis and the band turned into a swinging, seamless mix of country and rock and roll. The song had been covered by multiple artists, but Elvis's version stood out. He borrowed some phrasing from Tommy Edwards, but made the arrangement his own. It was classic Presley, and it showed that he could still deliver even when the odds were against him. I Got Stung closed the session with the same frenzied energy as the earlier tracks. The lyrics were simple, but the sound was powerful. It took 24 takes to get it right, but the final result was worth the effort. Elvis had once again proved that he could rock harder than ever. For the next 21 months, Elvis wouldn't step into a recording studio, but that didn't mean he stopped making music. Private recordings from his time with Eddie Faddle, and during his army stint in Germany, revealed a man who was still experimenting and honing his craft. He toyed with songs like Tomorrow Night, The Fool, and Such a Night, which would later become key parts of his repertoire. Elvis's private recordings also showed his love for gospel music. He sang Just a Closer Walk with Thee and Danny Boy, giving them a unique twist. These recordings were a glimpse into the mind of a musician who was always pushing the boundaries, always looking for new ways to express himself. As the world turned towards softer versions of rock and roll, Elvis was experimenting with new styles and sounds, preparing for the challenges that awaited him when he returned from the army in 1960. The king was about to enter a new chapter, and the music world was ready for his next move. Elvis came back from the army a changed man, and it wasn't just his looks. His voice had grown stronger and smoother, and he was ready to explore new sounds and styles. In March 1960, he stepped back into the recording studio with a clear plan. His manager, Tom Parker, wanted to broaden Elvis's audience, making him appeal not just to teenagers, but to their parents and even grandparents. The goal was to turn Elvis into a respected entertainer who could stand the test of time. Elvis's return to the studio was like a homecoming. He started with a song called Make Me Know It, a mid-tempo rocker that was a safe choice. It showed off his new, more mature voice, which was smoother and more versatile than ever before. The song wasn't groundbreaking, but it was a good start. Next he recorded Soldier Boy, a doo-wop number he had played around with while in Germany. This song was a step up, with Elvis's voice sounding both sweet and powerful. It was a reminder that Elvis could still deliver a strong ballad, even if he was branching out into new territory. The real showstopper was fame and fortune. This song demonstrated just how much Elvis's voice had improved. He could switch between a strong, beefy sound and a silky smooth higher register, all while telling a story with the lyrics. It was a perfect blend of emotion and melody, and it set the tone for the rest of the session. A Mess of Blues was another highlight. It had an edgier feel, but Elvis's voice was now more plaintive than harsh. The song also showed off his improved phrasing, making the lyrics come alive. The Jordanaires, his backup singers, added a train-like sound that perfectly complemented the track. The session wrapped up with It Feels So Right, a slow, bluesy number that was both sexy and smooth. Elvis didn't need to shout or holler. He could seduce his listeners with his voice alone. The session was a success, and the new songs were an instant hit. Billboard magazine declared, "Presley is back, and he's as hot as ever." A few days later, Elvis appeared on a TV show called Welcome Home Elvis, hosted by Frank Sinatra. It was a historic moment, but the show itself was a bit chaotic. Elvis performed Stuck on You and Fame and Fortune, and he seemed relaxed, even if he looked a bit unsure of what to do with his hands without a guitar or microphone. The real challenge came during a duet with Sinatra, where Elvis had to sing Witchcraft, while Sinatra sang Love Me Tender. Elvis had trouble reading the cue cards and looked awkward, but the duet managed to go off without a major hitch. Despite the nervous moments, the show was a ratings success, and it helped reintroduce Elvis to a broader audience. On April 3rd, Elvis returned to the studio for another marathon session. This time, he and the band recorded 12 stunning tracks, including 2 of his most memorable hits. The new songs showed just how much Elvis had grown as an artist. His voice was fuller, his phrasing was more refined, and his choice of material was more diverse. It was clear that Elvis was no longer just a rock and roll star. He was becoming a versatile entertainer who could appeal to a wide range of listeners. The changes in Elvis's music and image were all part of a larger plan to secure his place in the hearts of Middle America. The goal was to make him a household name, and it was working. Elvis was back, and he was better than ever. Elvis stepped into the studio with a plan. He was ready to show everyone that he was more than just a rock and roll sensation. His first choice of song was Peggy Lee's Fever. It was a bold move because Fever was a jazz song, and not what people expected from Elvis. But he didn't change the song much, just slowed it down a bit and made it even sexier. The recording sounded amazing in living stereo, which made everything sound rich and full. Next, Elvis tackled Like a Baby, a blues song written by Jesse Stone. Elvis loved this song so much that he studied different versions, like those by Vicki Nelson and Tony Arden. He borrowed Nelson's phrasing and made the song his own by stripping it back to a simple, authentic blues arrangement. It was clear that Elvis had grown as a singer during his time in the Army, and he was now more confident and in control of his voice. Elvis then took on It's Now or Never, a song with new lyrics set to the Italian classic, O Sole Mio. He had played around with a similar song while in Germany and knew it would be a challenge, but Elvis nailed it. He controlled his voice, switching from loud to soft with ease, and hit the high notes like his idol, Mario Lanza. Critics noticed the change, with some saying it was the best Elvis they had ever heard, while others thought he was moving away from his rock and roll roots. After a short break, the session continued with The Girl of My Best Friend. This was a pop song, and it didn't quite fit Elvis's usual style, but he gave it his all. The lyrics might have been more suited for a teenager, but Elvis made it work. The song later became a hit in the UK, even though it was recorded years earlier. I Gotta Know was up next, another pop song but with a catchy hook. The Jordanaires and the production team made it fun and memorable. It was released as the B-side to Are You Lonesome Tonight, but it deserved more attention. Dirty, Dirty Feeling was a bit of a letdown. It was a blues song by Leiber and Stoller, but it didn't have the same energy as the previous tracks. Elvis did his best, but the song felt repetitive and lacked the usual sparkle. Thrill of Your Love was different. Elvis brought a gospel feel to this love song, thanks to the help of Floyd Kramer's piano. It was a beautiful vocal, but it could have been even better with more time to perfect the phrasing. Elvis then covered Johnny Ray's Such a Night, a song with some suggestive lyrics. Elvis's version was more restrained compared to Ray's, who was known for his grunts and groans. It was still a good recording, but it lacked the raw energy of Elvis's earlier work. Are You Lonesome Tonight was a surprising choice. This old waltz had been around for decades, but Elvis made it his own. He based his version on an older recording and added a dramatic recitation. The song became a classic for Elvis, and he performed it many times over the years. The Girl Next Door Went a Walkin' was one of the weaker songs from the session. It was a promise to guitarist Scotty Moore, but the song was forgettable despite Elvis's good vocal. Elvis and his friend Charlie Hodge recorded I Will Be Home Again as a duet. It was a pop song, but their voices blended beautifully. The arrangement followed the original closely, and it was a nice addition to the album. As the session wound down, Elvis recorded Reconsider Baby, a blues song he had played with the $1 Million Quartet. The saxophone solo by Boots Randolph was stunning, and Elvis's voice soared. It was a perfect ending to a successful session. The album, Elvis Is Back, was released the following month. It showcased Elvis's new, mature sound and a wider range of styles. The album received mixed reviews, with some critics praising Elvis's growth and others missing the energy of his earlier work. Despite the mixed opinions, Elvis Is Back was a triumph, marking a new chapter in Elvis's career. A few months later, Elvis started working on the soundtrack for his first post-Army film, G.I. Blues. The sessions were spread over April and May 1960. Did Ya Ever was the first song completed, a humorous march that worked better in the film than on record. Doin' the Best I Can was the standout track, a tender ballad that Elvis performed with care and emotion. It was a song that could have fit on the Elvis Is Back album and deserved more attention. The G.I. Blues soundtrack was a mix of styles, and while some songs were silly, others showed Elvis's versatility. The sessions were sometimes tense, but Elvis's dedication to his craft was clear. The album captured a different side of Elvis, one that was ready to explore new musical territories. Elvis Presley's film, G.I. Blues, is a unique entry in his filmography. It's not quite like the rock and roll musicals from the 1950s, nor does it fit the mold of the travelogues that dominated his 1960s films. Instead, it's more like a classic Hollywood musical, the kind that was popular in the 1940s and early 1950s. The story is pretty basic. A soldier makes a bet that he can get together with a dancer, but then he falls in love with her and regrets the wager. It sounds like a plot you've heard before, and that's because it is. But what makes G.I. Blues stand out is the music and Elvis's performance. The soundtrack is a mix of styles. GI Blues, the title song, has a march-like rhythm and a catchy chorus. Elvis's voice had matured since his early days, and he delivers the song with a softer, more tender tone. Tonight Is So Right for Love is a rock-light version of a classical piece by Jacques Offenbach. It's an interesting choice, but it didn't work as well as the remake, which used a different melody and was titled Tonight's All Right for Love. Both versions show Elvis's evolving sound, but the second one fits better. What's She Really Like is a mid-tempo ballad that doesn't quite take off. It's a bit heavy-handed, and the melody isn't as strong as it could be. The song only appears briefly in the film, with Elvis singing it in the shower. Despite this, a full studio version was recorded, suggesting that a longer scene might have been planned but was cut. Blue Suede Shoes is re-recorded for the film, but it's not as powerful as the original 1956 version. It's heard in the background during a fight scene, and the recording feels more casual, almost like a quick take to get it done. Wooden Heart is one of the most famous songs from the film, especially in Europe. It's a light-hearted number with some German lyrics, and it hit #1 in the UK for 6 weeks. Elvis's voice sounds different here, softer and more mature, almost unrecognizable from his 1950s recordings. Shoppin' Around is another standout. Originally recorded by Joel Gray, Elvis's version gives it a 1950s rock and roll feel. It's one of the better tracks on the soundtrack, and Elvis's lighter delivery suits the song well. Pocketful of Rainbows was a challenge for Elvis, but he and the band managed to nail it in just 2 takes. The melody is a bit angular, but it's a solid recording and shows how Elvis's range had expanded since his early days. Frankfurt Special is a rocker with a train rhythm, but it's not as intense as Mystery Train. The lyrics are more interesting than the music, but the song is still catchy, especially with the Jordanaires providing some unique backing vocals. Big Boots is a sweet lullaby, and Elvis sings it beautifully. It's a gentle, tender moment in the film, and it's a shame the middle section isn't longer because the melody is really attractive. The film itself is a mix of old and new. It has the charm of a classic musical, with a bit of Elvis's rock and roll edge. The casting of Juliette Prowse as the love interest was a smart move. She had recently appeared in Frank Sinatra's film, and was associated with the classic Hollywood musical style. Her presence in GI Blues helped bridge the gap between the old and the new. The film was part of a brief revival of traditional Hollywood musicals in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Films like Jiggy and Can-Can were setting the trend, and GI Blues aimed to ride that wave. It worked, and the film was well received by many critics, even those who were initially skeptical of Elvis. Elvis's next film, Flaming Star, was a different kind of challenge. Set in the Old West, it's a more serious and dramatic film. Directed by Don Siegel, it's often considered one of Elvis's best acting performances. Film deals with themes of race and identity, and Elvis plays a half-Native American, half-white man caught between 2 worlds. The reviews were mixed, but many critics praised Elvis's performance, noting that he had grown as an actor. Despite the serious tone of Flaming Star, there were still attempts to include songs. Summer Kisses, Winter Tears was one of the cuts that didn't make it to the final film. It was supposed to be a campfire song, but it didn't work well with the film's serious themes and was removed after test screenings. In the end, both GI Blues and Flaming Star show different sides of Elvis Presley. GI Blues is a fun, lighthearted musical that helped Elvis transition from rock and roll rebel to Hollywood star. Flaming Star is a more serious, dramatic film that showcased Elvis's acting skills. Both films are important parts of his legacy, each in its own way. Elvis Presley's transformation after his army service was remarkable. When he returned, the public's perception of him had changed. No longer was he the controversial rock and roll rebel. He was now seen as a model citizen. Hedda Hopper, a well-known Hollywood gossip columnist, wrote that she had initially been skeptical of Elvis, but her opinion shifted when she heard from a colonel that Elvis was an exemplary soldier. She described him as a more mature and private individual, surrounded by a close-knit group of friends who provided both company and a buffer from the public. Nancy Anderson, writing in Movieland and TV Times, also noted the change in Elvis. She praised his voice, saying it was more mature, and that his manners and the loyalty of his fans remained unchanged. Anderson mentioned that Elvis was exploring a wider range of music, including blues, rock and roll, ballads, and hymns. This versatility was evident in his October 1960 studio session, where he recorded his first full-length gospel album, His Hand in Mine. The recording session for His Hand in Mine was a marathon, lasting 12 hours through the night. The album featured a mix of upbeat gospel songs and more serious ballads, showcasing Elvis's ability to blend different genres. The title track, His Hand in Mine, was a standout, with Elvis making subtle changes to the original recording by the Statesmen. His voice was more nuanced, and he used a wide range of dynamics, from whispering to powerful high notes. I'm Gonna Walk Dem Golden Stairs featured Elvis as part of the Jordanaires, blending his voice with the group's harmonies. The arrangement was dynamic, with Elvis sometimes taking a back seat to let the group shine. In My Father's House began with a full chorus by Elvis and the Jordanaires, followed by a solo verse from Elvis and a section led by the Jordanaires' bass singer Ray Walker. The song demonstrated Elvis's growing vocal range and his willingness to share the spotlight. Milky White Way was a blues-influenced gospel song that showed Elvis's ability to merge different musical styles. His phrasing and note bending added a unique touch to the traditional material. Known only to him, A Ballad in Waltz Time highlighted Elvis's use of his upper register, creating a beautiful and memorable vocal performance. I Believe in the Man in the Sky started with a sparse arrangement by the Jordanaires before Elvis's powerful voice took over. The song had a lighter sound and a quicker tempo, giving it a swing feel. Joshua Fit the Battle was an upbeat traditional spiritual that Elvis sang with a natural swing, supported by the Jordanaires. He Knows Just What I Need was a more somber track, with lyrics that were explicitly religious and less universally appealing. Swing Down Sweet Chariot and Mansion Over the Hilltop were both country-tinged religious songs, with the latter having a pleasant but somewhat repetitive arrangement. If We Never Meet Again was another ballad in waltz time, featuring a softer and sweeter sound compared to the original recording by the Blackwood Brothers. The album concluded with Working on the Building, an upbeat song that, while less effective, rounded out the collection. The album, His Hand in Mine, was a critical and commercial success. It was praised for its artistic quality and the emotional impact of the performances. Billboard magazine called it a fascinating set of performances, and noted that the gospel message had never been put forth with greater effect. The album was marketed as a more serious, mature artistic statement, appealing to a different audience than Elvis's previous works. During the same session, Elvis recorded Crying in the Chapel, a pop song with an inspirational theme. Although it didn't fit the album's overall sound and wasn't released until 5 years later, it became one of Elvis's best-loved songs and a hit in the mid-1960s. The recording of His Hand in Mine marked a significant milestone in Elvis's career, showcasing his growth as an artist and his deep connection to gospel music. Elvis recorded Surrender in the middle of a session, and it was meant to be a follow-up to It's Now or Never. Surrender is based on the Italian song Torna a Sorrento. Even though Elvis sang it well, there were some problems with hitting the high notes at the end. The song didn't have the same impact as It's Now or Never, but it still hit #1. It showed how Elvis was starting to rely on formulas that had worked before. In the fall of 1960, Elvis and his friends made some private recordings. These were just for fun and included a mix of different songs, from classic show tunes to more relaxed casual tunes. The recordings were later released on 2CD, and they gave fans a peek into Elvis's personal life and his musical tastes. You can hear Elvis playing the piano and singing songs like If I Loved You from the musical Carousel. It's a different side of Elvis, more relaxed and natural. In November 1960, Elvis was back in the studio to record songs for his next movie, Wild in the Country. The movie was supposed to be a big step forward for Elvis. It was based on a good book and had a strong script by Clifford Odets, a famous playwright. But something went wrong, and the movie turned out to be a disappointment. The script was full of clichés, and the direction wasn't strong enough to make it work. Elvis looked uncomfortable on screen, and the critics didn't like it. They said it was badly written and overdramatic. The songs from the movie were better than the movie itself. I Slipped, I Stumbled, I Fell was the only rock song and ended up on a different album. Lonely Man and In My Way were beautiful, quiet ballads. They showed a different side of Elvis, with just his voice and a guitar. These songs felt more personal and intimate, like you were listening to Elvis in a small room. The next year, 1961, was a big year for Elvis. He had been busy with music and movies, and he was starting to be recognized as a serious artist. People like George Cukor, a famous film director, were saying nice things about him. In an interview, Elvis talked about his goals as an actor, and said he wanted to improve in that field. He admitted that he had lost some of his younger fans while he was in the army, but he was okay with that. He was trying to reach a broader audience. In March 1961, Elvis went back to the studio to record his next album, Something for Everybody. The album had ballads on one side and upbeat songs on the other. It was a mix of different styles, trying to appeal to everyone. But even though the songs were well made, they didn't have the same energy and edge that Elvis had in his earlier work. This was the start of a period where Elvis's music began to lose some of its spark. The recordings from 1961 and 1962 showed that Elvis was starting to lose his musical direction. The songs for his movies were getting lighter and less serious, and the material he was choosing for his studio albums wasn't as strong. Even though Elvis was still in great vocal shape, the material wasn't keeping up with his talent. It was a sign of things to come, and it showed that Elvis was facing some challenges in his career. Elvis Presley's album, Something for Everybody, opens with a powerful ballad called There's Always Me. This song, written by Don Robertson, was a standout in Elvis's career. It starts with a gentle piano intro, but as the song progresses, Elvis's voice grows stronger, almost like he's telling a story of a man who finds his confidence. By the end, he's singing with such passion that it's hard not to be moved. The arrangement is perfect, especially the ending, which could have been overly dramatic but isn't. It's a masterclass in ballad singing, but it's a bit of a shame that the rest of the album doesn't match this level of excitement. The next track, Give Me the Right, is a bluesy rock and roll ballad. Millie Kirkham's wordless soprano adds a beautiful touch. This song feels more familiar, like something from Elvis's earlier album, Elvis Is Back. While it's a good song, it doesn't bring anything new to the table. It's polished and professional, but it feels a bit repetitive compared to the freshness of There's Always Me. It's a Sin is a country hit from the 1940s that Elvis tried to update with a modern touch. His voice is stunning, but the song feels a bit out of place. It's well executed, but it doesn't quite fit the pop music of 1961. It's like Elvis is trying too hard to sound nice, rather than really connecting with the song. Sentimental Me is another update of a 1940s ballad. Elvis's dramatic pauses and sweet vocals are impressive, but the song lacks the emotional depth it needs. It's beautifully sung, but it feels more like a performance than a heartfelt expression. Starting Today starts with a lovely piano arpeggio by Floyd Kramer. The song was written by Don Robertson, who had a knack for writing songs that suited Elvis's evolving sound. It's a sweet, country pop crossover that fits Elvis well. Gently closes the first side of the album with a folkish feel. The guitar work is lovely, and the Jordanaires add a nice touch during the chorus. Elvis's vocal is a bit heavy in the lower register, but it works well with the song's gentle tone. The second side of the album kicks off with I'm Coming Home, a song that Elvis's labelmate Carl Mann had previously released. Elvis's version is tighter and more rhythmic, with the musicians getting a chance to show off during the instrumental break. In Your Arms is another ballad that feels a bit watered down compared to Elvis's earlier work. It's a well-executed song, but it lacks the raw energy and passion of his best performances. Put the Blame on Me is a bluesy track with an interesting organ sound. It's a strong performance, but it could have used a bit more grit and a more down-and-dirty instrumental break. Despite that, it's still a standout track. Judy is one of the weakest songs on the album. It's awkward and lacks a memorable melody. The band seems a bit off, and Elvis's vocal switches between high and low registers without the ease he usually shows. The only highlight is Floyd Kramer's striking piano solo. I Want You With Me is a much better track. Originally recorded by Bobby Darin, Elvis's version is more confident and raw. He unclutters the arrangement and delivers a performance that's more in line with his earlier, more dynamic work. It's one of the few songs on the album that captures the spirit of the old Elvis. While I Want You With Me, There's Always Me, and Put the Blame on Me are some of the best tracks, the rest of the album feels a bit watered down. The ballads are tender but subdued, and the rockers don't have the same energy as before. The album is slick and professional, but it lacks the raw energy and joy that made Elvis's best work so special. The soundtrack to Blue Hawaii presents a different side of Elvis. The film itself is a musical comedy, and while some blame it for the string of similar movies that followed, it was a good fit for Elvis at the time. He wasn't required to act beyond his capabilities, and the movie and music were polite enough to continue his transformation into an all-around entertainer. The soundtrack is a mix of well-known Hawaiian-themed songs, traditional Hawaiian numbers, and new material. Hawaiian Sunset is a standout with Elvis's softer tone and wider vibrato. It's a beautiful song that fits the movie's relaxed vibe. Island of Love is another new song, but it's not as strong as Hawaiian Sunset. The melody is less memorable, and the instrumental section feels unfinished. It's a bit of a letdown, especially when you consider that they could have used actual older songs instead of trying to mimic them. Beach Boy Blues is a fun, fake blues song with clever lyrics that fit the movie's setting. Elvis doesn't take it too seriously, but he still enjoys singing it. It's a good example of how the soundtrack manages to blend different styles. Slisson Sand is a light, inoffensive rock and roll song that's easy to listen to. It's not particularly memorable, but it fits the movie's light-hearted tone. Ito Eats is a silly calypso number that doesn't really add much to the film or the album. It's a bit of a waste of time, but it shows that Elvis and his band were still taking their work seriously, even with less than stellar material. Aloha O is a traditional Hawaiian song that Elvis sings beautifully, partly in Hawaiian and partly in English. It's a lovely song, but it could have been used more in the film to give it a more authentic feel. Almost Always True is a fun, upbeat song based on a French children's tune. The arrangement is playful, with the number of beats before the word almost increasing with each verse. Boots Randolph's saxophone solos are especially energetic and add a lot to the song. Overall, Blue Hawaii and its soundtrack are a good example of what Elvis was capable of in a musical comedy. The songs are pleasant and fit the movie well, even if they don't represent the best of Elvis's career. Elvis's music journey in 1961 was a mix of hits and misses, but it showed just how versatile he could be. After his military service, Elvis was back in the studio, exploring new sounds and styles. One of the standout tracks from this period was Can't Help Falling in Love. Based on an old French melody, Elvis and his team crafted a timeless song that would become one of his most beloved. The recording, with its smooth melody and Elvis's powerful yet intimate vocals, was a masterpiece. It didn't just top the charts, it became a standard, covered by many artists over the years. In March, Elvis performed a live show at Pearl Harbor. It was a rare appearance, and it showed a different side of him. On stage, he was all energy and rock and roll, far from the soft, sweet tones of his studio recordings. He belted out songs like All Shook Up, with a raw, edgy sound that reminded everyone why he was a legend. The crowd went wild, and the show received glowing reviews. It was a glimpse of what might have been if Elvis had focused more on live performances and less on movies. The studio sessions in June produced another hit single, his latest Flame and Little Sister. These songs had a tougher, more modern sound, with Elvis's vocals and the band's instrumentation showing that he could still make music that was both current and exciting. But the success of these songs didn't stop the trend of Elvis moving towards more pop-oriented material. The other songs from the session, like Kiss Me Quick and I'm Yours, were well crafted but lacked the emotional depth and passion of his earlier work. In July, Elvis worked on the soundtrack for Follow That Dream. The songs were light and breezy, fitting the film's comedic tone. Follow That Dream was an upbeat number with a positive message, but it felt more like a catchy tune than a deep, meaningful song. Despite this, Elvis's vocal performance was as strong as ever, and the song did well. Throughout 1961, Elvis's career was a balancing act between the demands of the film industry and his own artistic desires. While some of the material was hit or miss, his vocal talents and stage presence were undeniable. The year showed that Elvis was still capable of producing great music, but it also hinted at the challenges he would face in the coming years as he tried to stay relevant in a rapidly changing music scene. Elvis's journey in 1961 was a reminder of his incredible talent and the impact he had on the music world. Whether he was singing a heartfelt ballad or rocking out on stage, Elvis continued to captivate audiences and leave a lasting legacy.